You woke up this morning. You checked your phone before you even checked if you were okay. You scrolled. You swiped. You consumed 47 pieces of content before your feet touched the floor. Then, you got dressed in clothes you bought to impress people you don't like. You drove or commuted in traffic you hate to a job that exhausts you, to earn money you'll spend on things designed to make you feel like you're not enough. And tonight, you'll come home, sit in front of a screen, and repeat it all tomorrow. Now tell me, does that sound like freedom to you? Because here's what no one in your school, your government, or your social media feed ever told you. The chains that bind you today are invisible. They don't cut your wrists. They don't lock your doors. They live inside your mind, installed so quietly, so gradually, so cleverly, that you never even noticed they were placed there. You are not free. And the most disturbing part of that sentence? You were never supposed to figure it out. You're enslaved, and you don't even know it. Stay with me. Because in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to dismantle 8 pillars of modern existence that have been quietly running your life without your permission. Your education, your debt, your attention, your identity, your dopamine, your time, your beliefs, and your idea of freedom itself. And by the end of this, I promise you, you will never see the world the same way again. Let's begin with a thought experiment. Imagine you were designing a system, not to punish people, not to lock them up, but to control them completely, cheaply, and forever. What would that system look like? You wouldn't use walls. Walls can be torn down. You wouldn't use guards. Guards can be bribed. No, if you were truly brilliant about it, you'd build the prison inside the person's own mind. You'd make them police themselves. The philosopher Michel Foucault called this concept disciplinary power. He described a prison design called the panopticon, a circular building where every cell is visible from a single central tower. The genius? The prisoners can't see whether anyone is actually in the tower, so they assume they're always being watched. And so, they always behave. Foucault's insight was devastating. You don't need a warden if you make every prisoner their own warden. Now ask yourself, in 2026, who is in the tower? Who is watching you? And more importantly, does it even matter anymore? Because the tower has been so perfectly replicated inside your own psychology that the watcher is you. Started before you were old enough to question it. At age 5 or 6, you were taken from your home and placed in a room with 30 other children your exact age, a completely artificial grouping that exists nowhere else in. Human history. You were told to sit still. Raise your hand. Speak only when spoken to. Follow the schedule. Memorize the information. Repeat it back. Score well on the test. Don't ask why. John Taylor Gatto, a New York City Teacher of the Year, spent 30 years teaching before writing something explosive. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that modern schooling was never designed to create thinkers. It was designed to create workers. Obedient, predictable, time-managed workers who would slot smoothly into the industrial machine. What school actually optimized you for: sitting for long periods without complaint, following instructions from authority figures without question, being evaluated constantly and internalizing your worth based on those evaluations, competing with peers rather than collaborating with them, suppressing curiosity when it wasn't on the curriculum. These are not the skills of a free person. These are the skills of a managed one. And the deeper tragedy? By the time you were old enough to question it, the conditioning was complete. You had already learned that your value was determined by external grades. That boredom must be endured, not escaped. That authority figures know best. And that thinking for yourself is, at best, mildly inconvenient. The cage was built before you even knew you were a bird. So you graduate. Congratulations. You've been awarded a piece of paper certifying that you sat still and absorbed information for 16 years. And now, in the United States alone, you likely owe between $30,000 and $200,000 for the privilege of receiving that conditioning. But here's the exquisite cruelty of the design. The debt doesn't come later. It starts now. And it does something very specific to the human psyche. It makes you afraid. Not the sharp fear of a predator, the slow, chronic fear of financial instability. The fear that makes you take the stable job instead of the meaningful one. The fear that makes you stay in relationships, cities, and careers that no longer serve you, because leaving feels like financial suicide. Debt is not merely a financial instrument. It is a behavioral instrument. It transforms free individuals into risk-averse, compliance-seeking employees who will accept almost any working conditions rather than face the terror of default. The economist Thorstein Veblen wrote about pecuniary emulation, the endless human drive to signal status through consumption. But what he couldn't fully anticipate was a world where consumption would be pre-financed through debt, meaning the signaling itself would become the mechanism of enslavement. You buy the car on credit to look successful. You buy the house on a 30-year mortgage because that's what adults do. You upgrade your phone on a payment plan because last year's model makes you feel behind. And every purchase tightens the leash because now you need the paycheck, even more than before. The system doesn't need to threaten you. It just needs you to be afraid of losing what you have. And debt ensures that fear is always present, always background, always motivating your compliance. In 2023, the average American spent 7 hours and 4 minutes per day looking at a screen. 7 hours per day. That is almost half of all waking hours. Over a lifetime, it amounts to roughly 44 years of screen time. And every single minute of that time, every scroll, every tap, every pause is being harvested, analyzed, and sold. Here's the uncomfortable truth that Silicon Valley spent billions obscuring. You are not the customer of these platforms. You are the product. Your attention, your most finite, non-renewable resource, is being extracted, packaged, and sold to advertisers at industrial scale. Former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris described it as a race to the bottom of the brain stem. These platforms are not competing for your approval. They are competing for the most primitive, unconscious parts of your neurology, the parts that respond to novelty, outrage, social comparison, and fear. Your feed is not random. It is an algorithm trained by billions of data points, specifically designed to keep you in a state of perpetual psychological activation. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Activation. Because a satisfied person closes the app, an activated person keeps scrolling. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the achievement society. A world where we are no longer oppressed by external masters, but by our own internal compulsions. The modern slave doesn't work in a factory. He posts on Instagram at 2 a.m. seeking validation from strangers, not because anyone forced him to, but because the system was designed to make that feel like freedom, and it works. Because you chose to open the app, you chose to scroll. The chain is invisible precisely because you forged it yourself, one tap at a time. Let's go deeper. Let's go neurological. Dopamine is the currency of your brain's reward system. It evolved over millions of years to motivate survival behaviors: hunting, eating, mating, social bonding. Every time you did something that helped your ancestors survive, dopamine fired, and you felt compelled to do it again. Now consider what happens when an entire industry dedicates its best engineers, its most sophisticated AI, and its billions in investment capital to hacking that ancient system. The like button on social media was not accidental. It was a dopamine trigger. A tiny, unpredictable social reward that mimics the neurology of a slot machine. Variable reward schedules, where you don't know if the pull will win or lose, are the most addictive mechanism known to behavioral psychology. Casinos have known this for decades. Silicon Valley imported the principle and made it socially acceptable. But here's where it becomes truly insidious. Chronic dopamine activation desensitizes the reward pathway, meaning over time, you need more stimulation to feel the same satisfaction. A conversation with a friend feels boring compared to a viral video. A walk in nature feels dull compared to a TikTok feed. Real life, with its texture and slowness and imperfection, begins to feel like a withdrawal symptom. Neuroscientist Anna Lembke, in her work on dopamine and addiction, describes this as the dopamine deficit state, a chronic baseline of low-grade dissatisfaction that makes ordinary life feel unbearable and makes the next hit feel absolutely necessary. They didn't chain your body to a wall, they chained your neurochemistry to a screen. And you don't even know it, because the chains feel like pleasure. If you are still watching this, it means the conditioning hasn't completely taken over your mind. You are starting to see the invisible cage. Pause for a second, hit the like button to show the algorithm that you value awareness over distraction. And subscribe to this channel so you don't lose your way in the noise. We are just getting started. In 1988, Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman published a book called Manufacturing Consent. Their thesis, the mass media doesn't reflect reality. It constructs it systematically, selectively, in ways that serve the interests of those who own and advertise within it. That was 1988. Before cable news had 24 hours to fill. Before algorithms decided which information reached which eyeballs. Before social media turned every citizen into both consumer and broadcaster of fear. The modern media ecosystem is optimized for one thing above all else: emotional arousal. And among human emotions, none produces sustained engagement like fear and outrage. Here is what the research shows. Negative news stories generate significantly more clicks, more shares, and more emotional response than positive or neutral ones. This is not a moral failing of journalists. It is a structural inevitability of attention-based business models. If fear generates revenue, the system will produce fear. Relentlessly, industrially. The result is a population living in a state of perpetual threat perception, convinced that the world is more dangerous, more divided, more chaotic, and more hopeless than it has ever been, when by almost every objective measure, humanity has never lived longer, healthier, or more peacefully than it does today. You are being fed a diet of anxiety dressed up as information. And the effect on your psychology is profound. A chronically anxious person is an obedient person. They vote from fear. They buy from fear. They comply from fear. They don't question. They don't rebel. They just seek safety. And the people who design this system are delighted to sell it to you. Who are you? No, seriously, strip away the job title. Strip away the brand of car you drive, the sports team you support, the political tribe you belong to, the aesthetic you've curated on Instagram. Strip all of that away and tell me, who are you? The psychologist Carl Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear in society, the curated self we present to the world. He understood that most people mistake their persona for their true self. But Jung was writing in a world where personas were built slowly, through lived experience and genuine social interaction. Today, your identity is being manufactured at industrial speed, by brands, by algorithms, by political operatives, by media conglomerates who profit enormously from attaching your sense of self to their products, their content, or their ideology. Consider, in the 1920s, Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations and, not coincidentally, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, ran a campaign to get women to smoke cigarettes. He hired socialites to smoke in public and called it torches of freedom. He connected a product to an identity, liberation, independence, modernity, and sales skyrocketed. This technique has been refined for a century. You don't buy an iPhone. You buy a story about being the kind of person who thinks differently. You don't buy a truck. You buy a story about being rugged, capable, free. You don't adopt a political position. You adopt a tribal identity that tells you who the enemy is and what you stand for. Your identity, the very thing you use to navigate every decision, every relationship, every choice, has been largely assembled from outside you by interests that benefit from your compliance. And the cage is most effective when you believe the walls are your own preferences. Of all the resources that can be taken from you, time is the only one that cannot be replaced. Money can be earned again. Health can be recovered. Relationships can be rebuilt. But time, a Monday morning in April of your 34th year, once it passes, it is gone forever. Irretrievably. Absolutely. Now consider how modern economic life treats this most precious of resources. The average person in the United States works approximately 47 hours per week, more than almost any other developed nation. They commute an average of 27 minutes each way. They spend another 7 hours per day on screens. They sleep 6 to 7 hours, less than the biological minimum. And in between all of this, they are expected to exercise, maintain relationships, raise children, cook nutritious meals, pursue meaning, and somehow also rest. The math doesn't work. And it was never supposed to. The economic theorist Cathy Weeks argues that our excessive work culture is not an accident, but an ideology, what she calls the work ethic, a set of moral and cultural beliefs that equate productivity with virtue, busyness with importance, and rest with laziness. You have been taught to feel guilty for not being productive, to feel anxious when you're bored, to fill every silence with stimulation, to apologize for needing rest. And this guilt, this chronic low-level shame about your own humanity, keeps you running on the treadmill, earning, consuming, repeating. Meanwhile, your most irreplaceable asset, your hours, your days, your decades, is being traded for wages that are then spent on things designed to compensate for the dissatisfaction of trading your hours for wages. You work to afford the vacation from the work. You earn to buy the comfort that makes the earning bearable. The system is self-perpetuating. And it is brilliant because you are funding your own captivity. Here is perhaps the most sophisticated trick of all. They gave you choices. Endless, staggering, overwhelming choices, and called it freedom. You can choose between 400 varieties of breakfast cereal. You can choose between Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, HBO Max, and 16 other streaming platforms. You can choose between the Red Party and the blue party. You can choose between 47 career paths, all of which require you to sell the majority of your waking hours to someone else's profit. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse called this repressive desublimation, the way a system maintains control not by denying pleasure and choice, but by flooding you with them. So many options, so much stimulation, so much noise that the deeper question never surfaces. The question of whether the game itself is worth playing. In psychology, there is a concept called the paradox of choice, documented by psychologist Barry Schwartz, showing that beyond a certain threshold, more choices don't increase satisfaction. They increase anxiety, regret, and paralysis. When you have 400 choices, you're always wondering if you chose wrong. And people who are always wondering if they chose wrong are people who are too busy questioning their choices to question the system that created them. You are free to choose the chains. You are free to pick the lock design. But the walls? Nobody gave you a vote on those. And the most devastating part, the part that Marcuse and Foucault and Marx were all pointing toward in their different ways, is that a person who genuinely believes they are free will fight to preserve the system that enslaves them. They will defend it. They will attack those who question it. Because questioning the cage means questioning the identity they built inside it, and that is psychologically terrifying. So here we are, 8 systems, 8 invisible mechanisms, each one operating simultaneously on your mind, your biology, your identity, your time, and your perception of reality itself. Education that trains you not to think, but to comply. Debt that keeps you afraid. Attention economies that harvest your consciousness. Dopamine systems that rewire your reward circuitry. Media ecosystems that engineer your fear. Manufactured identities that make the cage feel like home. Time extraction disguised as ambition. And the grand illusion of choice, 400 flavors of cereal handed to you as you walk toward the checkout. Now, here is the question you need to sit with. Not how do I fix all of this, not who do I blame. The question is this: what would your life look like if you had designed it yourself? Not the life you inherited, not the life you were conditioned to want, not the identity assembled for you by brands and algorithms and ancestral shame, not the career path chosen from fear of financial ruin, not the relationships maintained from habit, not the beliefs adopted from your tribe. What would you actually choose if you chose deliberately, with full awareness of the forces that have been operating on you since birth? I'm not here to give you a 10-step productivity routine. I'm not here to sell you a course on escaping the matrix. I'm not here to tell you that awareness alone will set you free, because it won't entirely. The systems we've discussed are real. They are structural. They won't dissolve because one person woke up to them. But here is what I know. Awareness is the precondition of all agency. You cannot change what you cannot see. And the most powerful thing that happens when you truly see the architecture of your conditioning, when you can name the mechanisms, trace the incentives, understand the history, is that you create for the first time a genuine gap between the stimulus and your response. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and wrote about it with devastating clarity, said that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Even in Auschwitz, even there, they could not reach the final inch of his mind. Your circumstances are nothing like Auschwitz. But the principle holds. The mind that knows it is conditioned is no longer fully conditioned. The question that has been planted inside you right now, that nagging, uncomfortable, productive question, that is the beginning of something. Not liberation, Not some utopian exit from modern life, but the beginning of a more conscious relationship with the systems you live inside. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not instructions, but invitations. The next time you reach for your phone out of boredom, pause. Ask, what am I actually looking for? Is this a genuine choice or a conditioned reflex? The next time you feel inadequate because of something you saw online, pause. Ask, who benefits from me feeling like I'm not enough? What are they selling? The next time you feel the urge to define yourself by a brand, a team, a political tribe, a label, pause. Ask, is this who I am, or is this who I was trained to be? The next time you feel too busy to rest, too behind to breathe, too overwhelmed to question, pause. Ask, who profits from my exhaustion? And most importantly, the next time someone tells you that you are free, that this is the best of all possible worlds, that questioning the system makes you paranoid or ungrateful or dangerous, pause and ask, why does that make them so uncomfortable? The philosopher Socrates was executed by the state of Athens for one crime, asking questions. For teaching young people to examine the assumptions they had inherited, for pointing at the architecture of their reality and saying, look, just look at it. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. He didn't say the examined life would be easy, or comfortable, or welcomed by the people around you. He just said it was the one worth having. You found this video. You watched this far. That means something. It means the part of you that wants to see clearly, that quiet, stubborn, curious part, is still alive, still asking, still refusing to fully fall asleep. Don't put it back to sleep. If this video made you think, really think, share it with one person who needs to see it. Not to convince them of anything, just to start the conversation. The most dangerous thing in any controlled system is people talking to each other honestly.